Good. Then, so you kick off, lower expectations both.
I'd say that
what you say.
I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, just recovering from some stuff and hungover as normal. So it'll not be a high energy show from me.
Yeah. Brilliant.
So I'll lower everybody's expectations like fuck.
Yeah. Nobody else is what?
Who else is free?
No, are you cool? Yeah, she's always cool.
She's always
No, but this place is many sheets.
Oh, I think we're on. I think
Yeah,
I'm going to put this here.
This is high tech, Pete.
I'd rather be too cold than too hot.
Would you?
Yeah.
Will we kick off?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to
So,
start?
yeah, well, I guess thanks for joining us. Where am I looking? Is it here?
Yeah.
Hi. Pete has moved recently back to Belfast, as many of you will know. So we were chatting about Wake and what we were going to do with Wake. We kind of already decided we weren't going to do a 2023 edition of Wake, which will be the first time we've chosen not to do it.
Which was a silly thing because then I moved back to Belfast, which would have made it kind of easy to do.
I mean, certainly the budget doesn't have to take into account your first class flight in your hotel room in the Merchant, which definitely makes it more economically viable. But anyway, but I think we kind of wanted to keep the vibe, or keep the brand going a little bit. I don't like that word, but we'll just go with it because it's Sunday and I'm really tired and hungover. But just to keep a little bit of presence and connections with the community. Over the next, I guess it'll be just short of 18 months before we'll be doing another one again. And we were saying, Pete was saying, can we charge people for this content? And I was going, I don't think...
That's terrible. I mean, maybe I said that, but not in a cutthroat way.
I know, it was like, are you sure? And I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure.
There must be a way for us to charge people.
Pretty sure
I need to fleece these
it's
people.
really hard to monetize that sort of content. So we... actually what it was more was we owe these people, but they're our friends. We need to give them. We need to have a servant heart and give them.
That's what Adam was very good. He was like, we need to 4 or 5 times do free things and have musicians. No musicians tonight. And do kind of stuff. And I thought it was really good. Said so that we keep the dream alive.
Like the drug dealer who gives away free drugs at the skill game.
Exactly. That's it. Thank you. That's a good one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Gateway drugs.
Yes.
So, and here we are. And then, obviously, Pete, how has moving back to Belfast been for you?
Oh, it's been great. I loved it. I loved LA, but I haven't missed it at all, except for the weather. I mean, it's freezing. I mean, it's killing me outside, actually.
It's been pretty mild.
No, but this year, because it's all this 2022 was the hottest on record or whatever, but this winter's been fucking freezing.
There was about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
There was about 2 weeks where it was cold, and the rest of it's been like.
Yeah.
It's not me. But anyway.
Yeah, well, I find it pretty cool.
I mean, if you live in LA, of course. I mean, if you live in LA, it'll be a bit of a shock.
And it gets dark so early. We're talking 4:30, 5 o'clock.
4:30 in the midwinter. Yeah, it'll be dark here. But then the flip side of that is in the midsummer, it's like daylight right through to 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, which I really love.
Yeah.
That part. We were saying before we came on, I quite like at Christmas that it's really dark, and cozy quite early, and it sort of feels wintry, and you sort of lean into the winteriness of it, I guess, although if you've got, seasonally depressed thingy, it's not a great place to live.
Well, I did Christmas this year, which I don't usually do, Christmas tree and all of that, because it felt Christmassy, winter, cold, darkness, all of that.
Off camera, there's an actual. He hasn't taken his Christmas tree down yet. He
loves
it so much.
I partly kept it up for this, and then it made sense to put the camera this direction, so nobody sees it.
It's a landmark.
We get to see it.
You can't
the
actually
whole
see
of,
it from
literally
the
the whole of
street.
Belfast can see it.
Yeah,
because it's sitting in the corner of your
apartment.
Yeah.
Very good. So this was your idea, and what was your thinking? Obviously, keep the brand alive, give the drugs out, and give some content.
Yeah, and I suppose I was I just kind of think, I just kind of thought it would be nice. I kind of quite like talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
and I, you know, you might as well sort of do it in an environment where, you know, there's people who are interested in the same things, and whether there's online chat, and, you know, of course, when it comes to Wake, I'm usually the like which bars are open guy, as opposed to what's wrong with my life. Adam, nobody ever says that to me, thank God, because I don't know what to do. But I think it was for me a little bit about sort of trying to, after 10 years, finally, you know, engage a little bit with the work instead of sitting outside of my laptop. Yeah. So I'm not gonna. I once the grown-ups start talking,
yes,
I'm gonna like not be very vocal, but like I'm trapped here now. Yeah.
Well, we should say that we've got a few Wakers, people who've been part of Wake, to greater or lesser degrees. Alfie, you've been the least involved with Wake. You did
6 minutes.
6 minutes. You did 6 minutes at the last Wake, but it was a good 6 minutes about comedy, and we actually could talk about that a little bit. But anyway, so Alfie, you were part of Wake. Helen, you've obviously been part of Wake a few times. Mm-hmm. Jonny, you've been part of Wake. Jay has been a speaker at Wake. So we kind of pulled together a few of the usual suspects and to have a bit of a conversation.
And Pete, tell me this.
Oh yes. What would you like to
know?
So
pray tell.
How can I buy a ticket to the next week?
No. Don't worry about that. They're not on sale yet. Yeah. We'll let you know when they are. However, it's all very well having this kind of like construct that's like, oh, we'll do this thing, but it needs substance, Pete. It needs some academic cojones, as it were. So what do you think we should be doing? I love the way you're just like not wearing shoes, by the way.
Oh,
that's like very Zen Buddhist. Anyway, what oh master should we be learning or should we be talking about today and maybe ongoing through the series?
That's a nice setup. Thank you. So I was thinking about this. The theme, like we might end up doing an online Wake of some kind, but it might just be like this. I don't know. And if we do, I was thinking of the theme. I mean, it doesn't sound that exciting when I say it, but we're going to make it exciting. Is the unknown, right? And of course, that's a theme that we've explored in various ways at various times. But as many of you know, we're about to do a massive deep dive on Richard Boothby's work, particularly his book Embracing the Void. He was a speaker at the last Wake. Did you see him speak actually? Were you in the room? You were.
I saw some of it.
Yeah. So I'm going to interview him this Sunday and next Sunday, and we're doing an 8-week book study starting in a couple of weeks. So one of the themes that he explores is the idea that religion at its best has always been about a confrontation with the impossible or the unknown or some dimension of reality that we can't know, that we can't grasp. And I thought maybe I'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll kind of open it up a little bit. We've got a few academics here, artists, creative.
And me.
Yeah. Helen was asking, does Adam have a degree? And I was like, yes.
Did I pass that?
No, you did ask that.
Did I
have a degree?
No, that's
like
how it came.
You said in that.
Which institution gave him a degree?
Did he finish school?
You told me Adam actually has a degree in film studies. I was like, you was
got a
it?
media studies degree. He was the best kind of degree.
Yeah. No, I was at Coleraine.
Coleraine.
Don't ever mix those two up.
I thought you were going to say no, it wasn't a polytechnic, but it was actually you were.
Actually, call it what you like. It's still a degree.
Yeah.
Like as far as any employers are out there.
Was it a polytechnic when you were there?
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
University of Ulster.
Not that it would matter or make me a lesser person.
No. Yes. You can't be any lesser. So he does have a degree. In film studies, did we say that? In film
media,
studies? Media,
not just film. All of them.
All media.
Yes.
All the media.
Which, was very influential in what I did. Like,
it's all very
connected. He did media, created a thing called the lab, is one of the many things you did. Some of you know this, but it was very like a kind of pre-icon type thing, multimedia. There was talks, there might have been movie clips, music, maybe some comedy, whatever. Creative kind of almost late night talk show type vibe. On serious and interesting topics. And then, you know, I was the co-host, and then I went on to great things, and Adam just kind of, his career just basically crashed.
Well, I decided to not spend my time thinking about stuff. I went and did stuff.
You actually did stuff, yeah, that's true, that is very true. So yeah, I got derailed there. The unknown, that's what I'm going to talk about.
It's the most Northern Irish sounding word. I don't know if it's just your pronunciation, but how many vowels are unknown? Unknown. Yeah.
So what I want to say about the unknown, but yeah, like, so some of the views on religion from, say, Freud or Sartre. Sartre we were reading the other night, so he's in my mind, but we see religion as a way of trying to avoid the anguish of being human, the sense of abandonment, the sense of despair that's part of being a subject. And what he means by that is, in terms of anguish, he means the sense that you have to take full responsibility for what you do. Like, you can never advocate your responsibility. You can never say someone else made me do something, or, oh, I had a palm reader and they told me what to do. Whether you know it or not, you have to take full responsibility for your existence. And religion can help you try to avoid that anguish. But cleverly, just as an aside, Sartre says, like, even if you believe in God, and even if you think God speaks to you and tells you what to do, you still have to decide whether that was really the voice of God, or whether it was a demon, or whether it was a neurosis, right? So you always, even if you believe God has said something, you still have to decide whether that voice was God. So that's what he means by anguish. Abandonment he means by that we have to create our own ethics. There's no higher power that can tell us what is right or wrong. We have to embrace our own ethics. And despair, he simply means that there's no guarantee that what we give our lives to, things will pan out. So he says, if you're a communist, you can't believe that the communist utopia is definitely coming. So there's something despairing about that. You give yourself to the cause, but you can never think it's definitely going to happen. Or if you're a Christian who believes in the kingdom of God coming, you can believe it, but you can never have absolute certainty. And so for Sartre, maybe religion is a way to kind of avoid those things. But anybody want to say anything about that before we kick off?
Not just yet.
Not just yet, that's okay. And you know, and obviously there's a lot of truth to that, but I think a more psychoanalytic approach is an idea that, well, religion at its best has always been about tarrying with the negative, tarrying with something that you feel you cannot grasp, some sort of unknown dimension of reality. And in some ways, science is like that as well, because a scientist is interested in what they don't know. So they're tarrying with something they don't know. But religion kind of redoubles that and says, there's not just something that we don't currently know that we could know in 10 years or 20 years or 100 years, but there's also a dimension of reality that is inherently unknowable, and we can't ignore it. We can't know it, but we can't ignore it. And in philosophy, that's often called otherness. So there's a dimension of something that is other that haunts us. And then I'll say a little bit more about that, and then we'll kind of open it up. One of the things about Richard Boothby's book, in the second section of it, he says that religion both tries to help orient us to this unknown, says it's important for us to have a space for that in our lives, but it also often attempts to cover it up. And it does so in three dominant ways. The first is through superstition and kind of prayer that tries to control this otherness, sacrifices, kind of obsessional rituals that you think can kind of like help you master the unknown. and in Lacanian analysis that would be the imaginary, and the Greek religion would be a lot about that. Then there's the symptom of laws, which is the idea that religions give you lots of almost like rituals for how to deal with your life and how to deal with the unknown, how to make sure you don't get on the wrong side of the unknown. And he connects that a lot with Judaism, because you see a lot of the hundreds of laws that come out of this religion. And then the symptom of dogma, which he associates with Christianity, which is a series of beliefs, creeds that you kind of sign up to, again as a way of trying to domesticate this dimension of otherness. So whether it's, to say, kind of superstitious kind of sacrifices and prayers and whatnot, laws or doctrine, those are the negative symptoms of religion. But if you can kind of like not get caught up in those symptoms, religion at its best is a way of remaining sensitive to what Freud calls das Ding, which is the dimension of the unknown in other people, but also, if we make it wider than that, the dimension of the unknown that is part of reality itself.
Okay. Yeah. No, I definitely am interested to talk to you about psychoanalysis and religion, and in the context of like wake and stuff, and in the context of what you just said about the unknown. I mean, I guess like when I first heard this concept of Wake Festival, I told you before, I made the silly mistake of thinking wake was awakening, right? So it took you from one kind of foolish position into another more enlightened one. Obviously you corrected my misunderstanding, but still I thought it was kind of interesting, because in a sense I think what you're doing with psychoanalysis and religion is like saying that, you know, psychoanalysis can release you from a certain kind of structure, and that might lead you to you deciding no longer to be religious, or it might lead to you changing your religious structure but remaining somewhere religious, right? So in other words, like, and I'm really interested in like Lacanian psychoanalysis and the ideas of Lacan. I'm thinking about sacking it off and becoming a Freudian, but at the moment I'm still Lacanian. And what the really key framework from that, right, is the idea of this master's discourse, and then there's also these other discourses. There's like 4 or 5 in Lacanian thinking. One is the master's discourse, and one is the analyst discourse. And it's a bit of a generalization, but the analyst discourse is better than the master's discourse, because the master's discourse could maybe be thought of in your terms as like traditional religious thinking, where the master knows best and they tell the subjects what's what, whereas the analyst discourse is when the subject is able to understand how they relate to things at the level of desire, at the level of structure. And what you just said about the unknown would be a good example, right? Can we come to terms with das Ding? Can we see ourselves, how we're structured in registers? And in a sense, then, your work, if I'm understanding this rightly, is moving people from the master's discourse to the analyst discourse, or this happens if it goes well. Yes. So, but how do you, so what I wanted to ask you was, how do you ensure that some other bad things don't happen instead when you take someone out of the master's discourse? For example, one thing is, how do you avoid becoming another master? You said at the beginning, Adam, tell us, master, what to read. We're sat here in like the flat at the top of Belfast or whatever. We won't get into castration, but but
let's not go there.
But how's a problem? But one thing would be, how do you stop becoming another incantation of the master's discourse when you're doing these things? And then another thing, which would be, probably isn't much time to talk about, but Lacan also has this idea of the capitalist discourse, which comes in the 60s after his main 4 discourses, this kind of last thing, where the point is it changes all the time. So it's like the commodity becomes the master, so one then the other then the other. So how do you ensure, how does this work? Like, how do we get people to go out of the master's discourse into the analyst discourse, instead of, say, staying in the master's discourse or falling into the capitalist discourse?
I'm going to very briefly explain the discourses just very quickly. We actually did, if anybody who's on this, your patrons, you'll have access to this. I did about 6 talks on those discourses last year, so we can go back and have a look at them. But in a nutshell, there are 4 interconnected discourses, and I'm just going to kind of like give very concrete examples of each of them. So there's the master's discourse, is the first discourse, and the discourse is kind of a way in which one communicates, one relates. So the master is someone who tells you what to do, so it's a master's discourse. You can think of it like the infant. The first time they experience parents tell you don't do something, right? They're just telling you no, right? And often you have to interpret what that means, right? So you hear these commands from your parents, you don't quite know what they mean, you start to try and interpret them. But there's basically the master's discourse is a discourse of demand. Then there is the university discourse. And the university discourse is a type of discourse in which there is an expert who tells you what to think and how to interpret and kind of what is right or what is wrong. Then, I'll give you two examples of churches. A church as a master's discourse would be kind of natural law theory. God says X, Y, and Z. You just have to obey. So a church that's kind of a master's discourse gives you these commands to follow that from the pulpit, but that are from God. University discourse church would be telling you, who to vote for and how best to run your life and all of that. So maybe university discourse are more like progressive churches, and master's discourses are more like conservative churches, maybe. And then Lacan talks about what's called the analyst discourse, which Alfie was mentioning, and the hysterics discourse. And very, very briefly, the analyst discourse is where the person is not telling you what to believe, is not giving you advice about what you should do or what you shouldn't do, but they are a type of mirror in which you encounter yourself, and you encounter your own desires, you encounter your own doubts, your own unknowing, that unknown dimension, that thing in yourself, right? So that's the analyst discourse. And then finally, the hysterics discourse is where you're confronted with a person who is divided. You're confronted by someone who is contradictory. So I'm going to give you two examples, and this is where we get into paratheology. So for me, paratheology has both an hysterics discourse and an analyst discourse. So the analyst discourse is, think about Jesus with parables, right? The Gospels are a bit like an analyst discourse. The point of a parable is not to tell you what to believe, and it's not to make demands. Good parables confront you with yourself, confront you with your own desire, and you go, shit, right? And then you know the truth of yourself, and that truth sets you free. You become a better person, hopefully, right? And then for me, the most radical dimension of Christianity is that God is self-divided. My God, why have you forsaken me? That the most radical dimension is Christ is a divided God. That's the analyst discourse. So a church that is an analyst, that's an hysterics discourse. Sorry. So for me, paratheology is an hysterics discourse. It is a liturgy in which, from the pulpit, you encounter a divided reality, a divided absolute. So that's me trying to describe the four discourses. Sorry for taking so much time. And then very briefly is, how do you keep that open?
Yeah, and I guess I was asking because, I think those are really good descriptions, and I think one thing that strikes me, and not everyone would necessarily agree with this, because I think most people instinctively think the worst is the master's discourse, and the master is the enemy, but I think some of these positions are worse than the master's discourse. So if you're releasing people from the master's discourse, what's to stop them going into something even worse?
Yes. Here's something, John, like one of the things, Jonny, you were brilliant at, he was part of ICON, is I remember you saying things like, one thing very clearly in the pub was, you said, like, how can we offend ourselves this month? When we get together once a week in the bar to talk about what we're going to do. And I think you were intuitively always trying to undermine ourselves. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I'd love to just undermine all of us now. But, unfortunately, I'm doing dry January, so I don't have the power of the pub at the moment.
Yes.
No, I kind of think it was always like, it only makes sense if you're disturbing yourself. It's like, it's easy to disturb other people. And it's good fun as well. Yeah. But if you're disturbing yourself, that's less fun, but more real.
Yeah. So like what Jonny was doing on a regular basis within the group was trying to kind of self-undermine, almost create an institution in which self-undermining was kind of a part of its signature.
Mm-hmm. And inviting limitation to what we did as well, something like minimizing the number of words we're allowed to use, or the number of colours we could use, or like that.
Yes,
that's
putting limitations on. And you also, like you did say, like, and maybe I think you're half joking when you said, but you also got involved because you were worried that I would start a cult.
I was.
You said there was 2 reasons. Could you say the 2 reasons?
I came along to the first icon and thought I should get involved in this. One, because I thought I could make it better by like creating some ambient soundtrack to tie it all together instead of being so bitty. And then secondly, I felt like I had kind of some sort of wisdom, responsibility that this guy was slightly too charismatic, and I didn't understand what he was saying. But no, just keep him in check.
Yeah.
So kind of like a genuine. I mean, I laughed at the time, and now I think I'm glad I did that because like who knows what monster where he's been.
I actually think
he could have been on the top floor of the Oval Building.
No, I actually think society has a problem with undermining ourselves.
Absolutely
and particularly this contemporary moment. And if you look at humour, you mentioned like comedy and stuff. It's totally changed from self-undermining humour to like I'm sure of myself and I'm morally, didactically laughing, joking about the bad other. We've really lost the ability to undermine ourselves. So I think it's critical.
That's what I like about the unknown. I've just been riffing. I haven't been listening at all. I've been thinking about the idea of unknowing, and what you don't know is much more interesting than what you know. And I kind of go, it's if somebody asks you a question, you go, I don't know. It's a better question.
Yeah.
But this is why the community aspect of things, like actually concretely doing Wake in person. Obviously, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about social media over the last kind of 6 months because. You have this kind of critique of social media of like, touch grass, too online, too much screen time or whatever. And, you can argue, well, it's just a technology and it's not about the technology itself, it's about the way that the human subjects relate to the technology. And it's just like anything else. Like we thought that cars were demented in some way before we drove cars and accepted them. But there is something about social media as it relates to subjectivity that does undermine subjectivity precisely in its totalizing dimension, or its impetus for us to see ourselves and other people as undivided subjects. So first of all, as self-entrepreneurs, the capitalist aspect of social media that we're always presenting us, we are presenting ourselves as sort of products and we're creating content for this big media corporation and content, and capitalist content has to be sort of oppositional in a certain way, and oppositional means that there has to be sort of an other that's whole and complete, and therefore, attempt at being whole and complete ourselves. But the way we relate to each other on screen is very different to how we relate to each other in person. And this does involve things like being taken down a peg or two, which is, really important in terms of the fact that human subjects only become subjects through recognition. And recognition only takes place through being divided, through the other being divided. And this is how psychoanalysis functions. It only functions because we go to see somebody. We might think that this Freudian analyst knows a thing or two, but actually we gradually come to realise that they are divided as well, and we come to see ourselves in their eyes. So the trouble is with social media, it's like not only are we presenting ourselves as whole and complete, but we give the impression to the other that we are as a commodity. But also, through the whole history of screen media, when we see something on a screen, we relate to this screen image in a way where the image seems whole and complete. And then, because of the capitalist dimension and the sort of product dimension, we're all sort of aware that we can't really criticise each other online because we're sort of damaging someone else's product, we might be offending their career in some way, and so we can't really, this kind of leads this spiral of the other seeming whole and complete, ourselves coming to see ourselves as whole and complete, or having to come to see ourselves as whole and complete, and then we do feel lacking, which makes us feel even more alienated and insecure. So this is why this community stuff is so important, and it is so important to do that.
Hysteric thing, I think, because I would say it's interesting. People say social media is hysterical, but it's actually not hysterical enough.
No,
in that sense.
It totally isn't. It's totally isn't. It's totally capitalist discourse. Yeah.
And to jump in on that, and just someone I've been reading recently is that Byung-Chul Han, who's become a South Korean philosopher, is very interesting. But he argues exactly what you're saying, where that in the present age, we suffer from too much positivity. There is no otherness. That what you see on, say, social media is the age of achievement, the self-entrepreneur, where we become our own oppressors, where we have to optimize our lives. We need to seize every moment. We can be everything we can be. And this message actually, for Byung-Chul, he argues that this is why we see very modern symptoms such as fatigue, burnout, ADHD, very, very modern symptoms which are actually connected to this pure positivity of an undivided other, the person, whether it's the guru, you said, sorry,
but I would say that this is where I would say the capitalist discourse is much more religious or dogmatic than the master's discourse. And part of what you were saying,
it can be.
Because and the master, so the master's discourse sort of sets up, a separate being. This is, almost like, I don't know, actually that's a bad example, sorry. But when it's sort of like and it's always shifting, so it mystifies the where the sort of God-shaped total positivity lies, and we're always sort of chasing our tails, and we always think that we're not part, we can even imagine that we're sort of embracing lack, but it can still be it can still be positivized in the capitalist discourse.
Well, and for me, like the point of the four discourses, and even this is not quite correct, right? Because but you do go through them, and if someone finds my work, they may start by treating me as a master, and the point of my work is that I have to be ambiguous enough that you can treat me on any of the four discourses. So the first discourse is, I have the right answer. I have the truth. Paratheology is some system that has the answer, right? That brings you in, that starts to get you to try to work out what I'm trying to say, interpret it. That you also might come to this work as a university discourse, that there's something to learn, there's something to unpack, and that's kind of true. There's nothing wrong with that, and that's true, and that also brings you in. Just like someone might go to analysis, they don't go to an analyst because they're an hysteric. You would never go to an analyst if you go, well, they're just broken like me, right? You almost have to think of them as a master, as someone who has the answer, who can tell me what to do, give me the answer, or give me advice, tell me, what should I do to be better in my job or in relationships. But you go to the analyst as a master or as a professor, but then you discover, they're an analyst. What you actually discover is yourself. Eventually you kind of start to discover your own unconscious. And finally, I think maybe the cure is whenever you see that we're all divided, including the analyst, right? We are all riven with unknowing. We are all questions unto ourselves. And once you experience the hysteria at that level, we're all hysterics, we just don't know it, but once you can embrace the hysteria and see it also in the analyst, that's part of the cure. Maybe that's simplifying too much, but...
No, that's interesting, yeah.
Do you have some questions though, as well? Or...
Yeah, I'm not even sure if I understand them, but I'm going to read them out anyway. So Chris Eyre, hi Chris.
Hi Chris.
Says, if we're emphasizing that there's no certainty in any result, aren't we talking Caputo's perhaps alongside whatever the psychoanalytic stuff comes out with?
Yes, I get what he's saying.
Good.
This is a difference between deconstruction and deconstructive theology, which I've been very influenced by, and this stronger psychoanalytic thing. So here's and Chris already knows this. I like the question. It's a good leading question. But there's the unknowing of being unsure. There's the unknowing, and there's lots of different types of unknowing. So there's the unknowing of I don't know the answer, right? I watch loads of YouTube videos.
I do that a lot.
That was good, yeah. Because I love to watch YouTube videos and things I don't know about. So there's a type of things I don't know. There's the unknowing of, there's something, the mystical unknowing of there's a reality out there that's so great that I cannot grasp it because of my inherent limitations. But then the most radical move is that there's not simply something out there that is so vast I cannot know, but actually unknowing is woven into everything. Like, it's not that God is so great that we cannot know God. Kind of the radical move is God doesn't know God. Like, the radical move is that unknowing is not a limit, an epistemological limit, as in philosophy it would be called. It's an ontological thing, as in it's part of reality itself. And that's the difference between, I think, Caputo and what we're talking about. Does anybody want to jump in on that idea of the...
No, I always meant to read the Caputo stuff, but never did. But I did want to. I mean, it occurred to me. I know you didn't done a lot with Zizek. It occurred to me to ask you to talk about this, since the theme was unknowing. You know that quite famous thing where Zizek talks about like known unknowns, unknown knowns. So he's like, there's there's known unknowns, right? That's like things we know we don't know. Like there's a limit to the universe that's outside our knowledge. Then there's unknown unknowns, things we can't even imagine yet because they're not even within our consciousness. Yeah. Then there's
like an iPhone. Imagine an iPhone during the Middle Ages. That's an unknown unknown. You wouldn't even be able to do it.
Yeah, exactly. That's good. But then there's this kind of really interesting category of unknown knowns, right? Which is basically things you think you know but are in fact unknown, or something like that.
Well, well, that's also related to the way that we repress in terms of the unconscious. So, like unknown knowns.
Unknown knowns are things you think are fixed, but unconsciously, they're
or strengths you didn't know you had.
Exactly.
Well, exactly.
Not just weaknesses.
Which is an example of why you need to be in community with other people and to see yourself through the eyes of the other people, because other people know you often a lot better than you know yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, the radical thing and one of Zizek's examples is with WikiLeaks. Is in WikiLeaks, there was very little that was said in WikiLeaks that we didn't know, but we didn't want to know that we knew. Like we kind of knew that American soldiers were killing civilians, right? That was something we all knew, but we didn't want to know that we knew. Or the animal cruelty. Like we all know that terrible things are going on, and the reason why I'll avoid the leaflets is not because they're going to tell me something I don't know. They're going to tell me something I know, but I don't want to know that I know.
So is this like what's in sausages?
Yes, exactly. That's very nice, perfect.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's it. We all know. We just don't want to know that we know, and as long as we do, and it also like not looking at your bank statement, right, or not looking at a letter from the doctor, you kind of maybe know what it's going to say, but as long as you don't open it, you don't know what you know, and that's kind of the unconscious. That there's an unconscious dimension to that.
But my question would be, do we need that? Like, is that good? Because don't we need, in order to function as a successful person, you need this ability to disavow, right? This ability to decide not to know, because too much unknown and your subjectivity is fucked. You know?
Yes. This is true. The thing is, though, this is where, like structurally, there's always something else. Like there's the unconscious that cuts across everything. So it's like what religion can give us, and this is where the master's discourse is better than the capitalist discourse, in my opinion. So you think about like traditional religions, like, not that I'm a theologian in any way, but you always give the example of like Judaism, right? That you have all these rituals, you do them once a week, and it's more freeing. You perform these sort of maybe seemingly bizarre rituals. You have a dinner together. You do, I don't know what you do, but then you can get on with the rest of your week. Whereas in the capitalist discourse, there's a master there. We don't know where it is. And is it an unknown unknown, or is it a known unknown? I guess it's a known unknown. But there's always going to be in our reality. And you talk often about like positivizing a negativity, and I would agree with you on this. It's like there is a lack, and if we are conscious of the lack, we can maybe. And this is where pyrotheology and psychoanalysis has the capacity to be political. Yeah. Is that it can positivize that which is repressed within the political system. So we can actually be aware, because there's forms of disavowal that are useful, there's forms of repression, and Freud often even talks about religion being a crutch. It's, sometimes life is so shit we need an escape, we sometimes need to watch a Hollywood movie just to get going, we all have to live our lives. But on this sort of grander scale, there's a lack that insists, and we have a political system that completely denies lack.
Yes, and to give an example, which is a great Zizek example of something you were mentioning there, is where he says, like, if you have a kid and the kid has to go to see grandma. Traditional parents, if the kid says, I don't want to see grandma, the traditional parent will say, get your coat on, get in the car, you're going to see grandma, right? But the modern parent will sit the kid down and say, you really want to see grandma, you want to do the right thing, you want to, you're a good person. And she's like, says, well, that's even worse. One, because it's usually fake, i.e. if the kid says, I'll stay at home, they go back to the traditional get in the car, right? But two is, not only does the kid have to do it, but they have to like it. Like, there's no space for rebellion. And so for Lacan, what happens within Judaism is, it's not just that there's lots of rules, you can also disobey the rules. So there's all this stuff about how to transgress, how to kind of obey the rules, but the letter of the law, not the spirit of the law. And actually that's more fun. So, Shizak used the example of you shall have no other gods before me, which is a way of saying, well, you can have gods behind my back, but don't do it in front of me. Which is the parent saying, don't get drunk, but they secretly kind of want you to, but in that kind of in a controlled right way, but they have to be the parent, so they have to go, no, you shouldn't do that. But secretly, they want, the kid to go out, have a few drinks with their friends, get a bit drunk, be a bit raucous, and they'd be disappointed if they didn't. So whenever Lacan says, if God is dead, nothing is permissible, it's not that Lacan is a conservative saying that we need rules to obey. Lacan says we almost need rules so that we can disobey them.
No, exactly.
But within capitalism,
and
B. Young Chul, this is where you can connect it. Because he says, in a society where in social media, it's all about, there's no rules. You can be whoever you want to be. You can self-optimize. You can life hack. You can achieve. You can be your own self-entrepreneur. There is no space of rebellion. It's like working for Facebook. You not only do you have to work for Facebook, you have to like it. In the traditional jobs, you had to work, but you didn't have to like it. Now you have to fucking wear their t-shirt.
No, but the thing is, it's like, so human subjectivity is a symptom of what we're talking about. There's no fully formed human. There's no essential human where you're born and you're you. We're only who we are. We only speak. We only can have self-consciousness. We can only be in community with other people because we're born from less than nothing. So there's been a big mistake in this, 1968 with this idea of you can enjoy without borders. And unfortunately, this was, attempted a left-wing revolution, but it actually led to neoliberalism, basically, and the morass that we're in. Because we are less than nothing, and that's why we are something, and that's why we experience self-consciousness and wonder and have this almost spiritual, although it can perhaps be scientifically explained, relationship with the universe. The limitation we need in order to be able to relate to this world, because this idea that this sort of almost scientistic, and I'm saying I think science is more of the hysterics discourse, and I think obviously science is completely true, whatever, but you have this sort of master's discourse, a religious relationship with science often, but this kind of we know where we're going, there is there's an absolute in reality itself, or that I am myself in essence, not by having gone through a second birth outside the womb, that I'm marked completely by lack and all this kind of stuff. And because of this, we need things to get going.
And scientism, this is to be controversial for a second, but the science became a master's discourse when during COVID, it was the science says, the science is, whatever side that takes, that science is a master's discourse. But as Lacan says, science at its best is an hysterics discourse.
Yeah, and when science gets tied to capitalism as well, it becomes the master's discourse. And it actually,
or a university discourse. University discourse or master's discourse,
When university discourse disguises the capitalist discourse.
Yes.
But
I mean, there's loads I could say, but I mean, the science thing, just quickly, it's Marx who insists that we need to think scientifically, not in the humanities way, and that's but anyway, I think that's a whole other thing, but I wanted to say something about the 68 thing. I think that is worth kind of saying, that and also about the masters and capitalist discourse, 68 is still thought of as this kind of, by many people, this kind of revolution moment, precisely because it was desire without boundaries, but and this actually is the capitalist discourse. The masters discourse, I would say, I don't know, sort of borrowing what you said, Helen, but the master's discourse does allow you to acknowledge you're a lacking subject, and it gives you a fantasy with which to live as a lacking subject.
Yeah.
What the capitalist discourse does is it commodifies that lack, and it allows you to constantly feel in a cycle where you're going to be fulfilled and then you're not, and then you're going to be fulfilled and then you're not, and so on. So it doesn't. So this is really what. What the logic of 68 was. You can have what you want,
yes,
but obviously you can't. And at least the master's discourse acknowledges
you're only wanting because you lack in the first place. So there's no. Yeah.
So psychoanalysis really was the anti-68 discourse. So that time.
And Lacan did obviously criticise this enormously.
But just to explain the capitalist discourse very quickly, because I think it's really interesting what you're saying. So from what I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, but the capitalist discourse, and you can look these up, and you'll see all these really weird symbols. The capitalist discourse is a split subject, talks to you, but beneath them is the master, which means that, your boss, you call them by their first name. They're just like you. They're a friend, right? So on the surface, we're all equal under capitalism, and we all go into the marketplace as equals. We buy and sell, but actually, in reality, the people who are selling their labor are not at the same level as the people buying, right? So on the surface, we're all equal under capitalism. We're all divided subjects, but hidden in that, hey, we're all equal. We're all the same. Some people have all the power. That's basically it. Isn't that in a nutshell?
Yeah, and I'd say that the master is the most powerful figure in the master's discourse. The analyst is the most powerful figure in the analyst discourse. In the capitalist discourse, the subject is the most powerful figure.
So
the illusion is
capitalist discourse. It could become that.
Well, I think I mean that as in thinking is centered around subjectivity. That's why you get like identity politics, right? Like I am X, Y, Z.
But the irony is
the driving force that defines what society functions.
But the irony is, of course, is like
it's worse for the subject.
Exactly.
So agency, you get the agency, but you're more fucked than you were before you had it.
Power as a subject, you get absolutely less than fucking nothing. Well, actually, you get less than nothing. You get nothing, and you don't even know whether the system does very well at mystifying where the power resides, and we only discover it when it's too late, because very cleverly it weaponizes past emancipatory movements to disguise power dynamics today. And so if you criticize them, one is in danger of all kinds of things. But yeah,
it might seem like kind of abstract to talk about like these things like master's discourse, capitalist discourse, but to me it seems like it is my fault. Yeah, but to me it seems like this is from seeing your work, this is what's exciting about what you're doing in pyrotheology. And I guess I'm sort of working out. The enemies, there's two kinds of enemy. There's a master's discourse, there's a capitalist discourse. And it's interesting that you said you identify with analysts and hysterics discourse, but actually this is what pyrotheology can do well. It can combat masters and capitalists, and that's great. I think that's really exciting.
Because it's not like, I always use the example of, I think part of the reason why this Harry and Meghan stuff captures the imagination so much.
She's very obsessed.
It's a good topic.
As someone who really likes Harry and Meghan.
Wow, I
but it's the war between the master's discourse and the capitalist discourse, right? Like, so the master's discourse, the monarchy, which has its problems, what these people who aren't duped by, sort of the non-duped is one of Lacan's famous statements, but the lie of monarchy allows for certain functionings, and when British society or societies, obviously there's fewer monarchies around, it operated in a certain way, there was a necessary sort of lubrication of society through this, and this allows social cohesion through a kind of scapegoating of the royal family because you hate them, and a social cohesion because of pomp and circumstance, because, of ideology, you think, aren't we such a great country, all this kind of stuff. So that's one thing aside, but the master's the master's discourse is sort of the old order, but this new order, which Harry and Meghan represent, is the capitalist discourse, which is new wealth.
They think they're the university.
And they think that the university discourse is all about like we have the right thoughts, we represent. But there's a couple of people who've accrued, not nearly the same amount of wealth as Queen Elizabeth in just a few years from a few contracts.
Yes. How long did it take?
The British royal family has been around for millennia, but I don't know if the Queen's wealth is part of that. But in just a few years, and it's all to do with self-actualization and the right side of history and having the right ideas. But really, it's the same thing, if not worse, because it mystifies the power dynamics. We have a master.
So exactly. I was just going to agree. Harry and Meghan, just very quickly say, why you might say it's capitalist discourse is because it's all about how broken and difficult and all of that, but behind it is this incredible wealth and incredible power. And
it's a sign, obviously, of the fading of the master's discourse in our order of things, that the capitalist discourse is able to do this and is able to have this impact. But of course, the illusion is it's not really working anymore. But I think early on it was sort of, these are the right people to get behind because they're more ethical or what have you. But actually, the same dynamics are just at play.
Now here, you've gone very deep, very fast, very quick.
I have a question.
When can I go home?
Good Lord, I know.
When can I leave?
Who's Harry and Meghan? I was following it up to that.
Is that right up to that one? Yes. You got the massive discourse sorted, the capitalist discourse.
Well, yeah.
We should ask some of the questions.
Anything else?
Well, yeah, hold on. There's so many questions, but you guys haven't really given me a chance to get in. It's fine, it's good, it's exciting.
You want to jump in?
I'm kind of trying to work out the questions that they've already answered in the chat to each other, but Yeah.
And one thought I had is if you're doing a weight program but unknowing, you won't need to publish the program.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah,
nice.
great.
Oh, that's
Save a
good.
few.
Because you just people shop and you go, oh, it'd be a shame to tell you what was going to happen.
That's very good, and that saves us having to do
Saves
it.
us-
It's
But
always a
doesn't that
hassle
make
doing
it more
the program.
master's discourse where only Pete knows?
Yeah,
You
what's
know,
happening?
I was just talking about this coach I had at one time who did coaching like that, and it was very much of like power play.
Oh, yeah.
Unknown becomes the product you're buying then.
Yeah.
Hi, Jay, by the way. Jay's just joined us on the chair.
Where are we? Out there?
Yeah.
Carl Gardner asks, Adam, have you tried taking a shot every time you try to read a comment but can't fit it in? I'd be dead.
Yeah. We kept trying to get in, and we wouldn't let you.
Sawyer says, question for artists. Johnny, that'll be Johnny. How does art sort of play into this? When is art a disavowal of structure, and when is it a collective force to combat atomization or homogenization? I mean,
I have an answer for that. I don't know.
my answer to that is I don't know what the question is, but I do my best.
I have an answer to
questions,
that.
but I don't know the answer. There you go.
So I think art. The reason why art works
Anybody else?
is that art is
Yes.
like an embrace. It's a material embrace of contradiction. So it's not dogmatic. It's not coming down on one side or the other. You know, it might address themes, but what makes art is that it's about. It's touching on something ethereal about the world we live in, which is contradiction as such, which is like the rupture at the heart of everything, that which can't be named, that which cuts across reality. And I think this is where art is precisely political. You know, often we talk about like, oh, this is so political, oh, this is so... I actually think art that we, in that kind of cliched way, think of as political, as a bit annoying, it's hammering people over the head, isn't art because it's not political. Because it's actually apolitical, because it's come down on the side of one thing or another. It's oppositionalized, it's saying, this is the right way to think, this is the wrong way to think. This is the good group, this is the wrong group. Whereas art itself, and why we can identify, and this is why, you know, I don't think questions of representation really get to the heart of this, or aren't actually political, and mystify what's political in art, is that art is always political. Art is art, because it embraces contradiction. That's what makes it political, and that's what makes it universal, and that's why we can identify with different forms of art, people representing different roles in art, whether it's, you know, acting as a role that's not your identity or is your identity or whatever. But art touches on something that is universal, which is lack, which is what makes every speaking subject a speaking subject, no matter who they are, what they desire. So art is art, and art is difficult to talk about, as art is precisely touching on the unnameable dimension of reality, and the unnameable dimension of reality is what makes us self-conscious beings.
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, it means that art is that, like, you can't have an art which is pro-identity politics, because that is art. But whereas so much of the stuff we see on screen and in media is turning contradiction into opposition.
No, I think that's
by pushing identity politics, but this is precisely
and
art.
it's why it's difficult to do art under capitalism, because art
art
is antithetical to the logic of capitalism.
Well, okay. You see, I think what you're talking about is the difference between good art and bad art. As opposed to, you can't say that's not art, right? And also, I think, I mean, the one thing that I kind of feel I want to stand up for Billy Bragg or people like him, you know, who do like protest is a really important part.
Yeah,
of art.
absolutely is there. It absolutely is there. Yeah.
It can come from billionaires. It's not. It can be anti-capitalist, but still produced by the capitalist.
But the thing is, though, I think the likes of like Billy Bragg or someone like Ken Loach is precisely artistic, precisely because it's embracing contradiction. Because I think what is political is that, and often. In under the master's discourse, what's difficult today is it's difficult to protest the capitalist discourse because we're so uncertain of what the master is, what we're fighting against.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about this the other day, a drunken conversation about the locksmith.
Yes.
It's so hard to articulate because the logic, how capitalism operates, is so mystified to us that we constantly forget it.
Tell the stories about the locksmith and the dentist. That's a great critique of capitalism.
Okay. I mean, well, the first one is about like if I'm parking my car and I need 50p to park my car. It's not as good as the locksmith one, but I'll tell Rach really quickly. So if you said to somebody, "Can I have change? Can you give me change of this pound coin?" And they say yes. Well, I have 50p. I'll swap it for your pound. they would go, no, fuck off, basically. But then if they say, well, no, hold on, wait here, I have £1, I'll run down to the opposite end of the road and get you change in the shop. And then when they got here and you said, well, could you give me 50p for my trouble? You'd go, okay then, even though they made you stand and wait in the rain, because you're attributing value to the effort that they've made,
sacrifice,
right? Yeah. So the locksmith one's like, the guy who comes and lets the person into his house and he does it in like 10 seconds and then he charges him £100 and he says, Jesus Christ, you're well paid, that's pretty good, I must get into being a locksmith, right? And he goes, let me tell you, whenever I started this job, I would have done what I did now in an hour, and I sometimes would have broken the lock and had to charge people extra for the lock, and sometimes people would have been waiting in the rain and they're shopping and everything with their kids, like waiting to get into the house, and then I would have charged them £100 and nobody would ever complain, even though I was shit at my job and like actually making their lives harder. Nobody would complain. But as soon as I got good at it and like let people in quickly and did my job effectively, people are always saying, Christ mate, that's really expensive.
Yeah, but this is so that the lie of capitalism is that it's utilitarian, that the best people get paid the most, it's very productive. But the actual logic of capitalism is as you describe. And it's so it's pure death drive. So it's so hard to, and obviously as well, then there's another ideological dimension of capitalism, that any critique of capitalism is like communist and pro-Russia or whatever, So there's all these different ways that we cast our gaze away from the actual logic of capitalism, which is difficult to protest. But actually, so a lot of...
Can I say very quickly is that, often the discourse is, some people say, well, capitalism works, or at least works better than every other system, and that's why we should have it. And there's people who say, well, no, it doesn't work. Creates depressions, recessions, so, we should usurp it. But the psychoanalytic critique is that it works precisely because it doesn't. That it's very failure to work. It's just like, again, like relationships. It's the relationships works or a relationship doesn't work, but sometimes relationships work precisely because they don't. It's the failures that generate, for good or for bad, the working. Anyway.
So the whole point, though, is that capitalism is so tied to subjectivity and the issues of subjectivity that we can't understand capitalism without understanding subjectivity, which is what a practice like pyrotheology does. But I was just to go back to art, it's almost easier to protest the master's discourse. So, a lot of really great art from the 20th century, when we were still more within this like a master's discourse of the kind of old, early capitalism and even social democracy in the 20th century. And you get these films that are like protest films and, Ken Loach and these like great artists. But then almost today what we have is like often a kind of copy that follows the logic of protest, but it's actually not doing protest. Yes. It's actually mystifying. But I do agree that some of the best art is actually protest. Absolutely is. And
if you're saying this makes a lot of sense to me, in that one of the difficulties with protest today is, if you're protesting, in the capitalist discourse, if you look at it online, there's a barred S is on the top left-hand side, and below it I think it's the master, but the idea is that if the people who are in power are presenting themselves as divided, as broken, as just like you, then attacking them becomes impossible. And like Meghan and Harry is a kind of example, although people are turning against them, but it's very hard to protest against what appears to be a divided subject, but underneath they actually have the power.
As soon as you get to understanding the logic of what's going on, it's much easier to protest.
But one of the things that, just bringing in the art, and Jay here, is one of the things you are very interested in is punk, and Belfast punk as a type of artistic movement that is a protest movement, embraces kind of difference and contradiction. I don't know if you
I was just thinking about just Stiff Little Fingers' first album, and like Inflammable Materials, and then how they like
those guys. You might not. I don't know if I've never sat down and talked to any of them, but I bet you like
if you had like a political talk with them, they would just be like, whatever. But their art says it all. Mm-hmm. Like to the point where it's like it's so effective to what they were saying about the Troubles, but it's so effective to what's happening today. Someone like Bob Dylan, who'll be like, I don't write protest songs. Mm-hmm. And he obviously wrote some protest songs. He just even denied the art, but it's something of the unconscious connected to his art, and he just let it be. Mm-hmm. And so I think music as art is really beautiful. I think painting and art is really beautiful, and it touches my soul. And I mean, I think you see that even through like bands in Belfast who are like, oh no, we don't want anything to do that, like the song Teenage Kicks. You know, you still get something there of the hope for the future. So it's just, I feel like there's just a lot of things that are unconsciously said through art that are more beautiful. Like I honestly sometimes can't stand to hear an artist, a musician especially, talk about politics. Yeah. But then you'll listen to a song and it's just, it stays with you forever. You know?
Do you know what the original lyrics for Teenage Kicks was? Sorry. So
but I would love to.
Well, it's not. I mean, it just changed that a little, but it didn't. It obviously the lyric is "I want to hold her tight," but the original lyric is "I want to hold it tight," because it's about wanking.
No way.
Yeah.
Well, that is Teenage Kicks.
So I mean, that's the ultimate protest. Like in a world whenever you're like, you know, basically people are killing each other over religion. You know, I mean, and what you're saying is exactly correct. If you talk to any of the old punks, they'll all say, you know, and you'll interrogate them in a way and say, well, you know, talk to me about politically what, you know, you were trying to do, and they'll always say, well, we weren't interested in politics. And I'm like, that's fucking political. Yeah. You know what I mean? That's in this place. That's the most political thing you can do is say, I hate all that shit. You know.
I mean, there's one song, the name of the song's, but where they're in Stiff Little Fingers in that first album, they're just saying like, I don't want any, like I could do this side, you know, I could be, you know, this side or this side, and they just tear both of them down. I'm like, I don't want any of it. I just don't want any of it. And it's like that, like, I'm not going to allow binary thinking. I'm not going to allow violence. I'm not going to allow sides. I'm not going to allow armies. I'm not going to allow chain link fences to tell me that I have to make a decision. I'm not going to like my mom and dad or my band members. This is what we're saying. And it was,
and that at the time, like, you have to place that in the context. Like nobody had done that here. Like all the kind of, you know, all the other kind of, you know, creative forces that are, you know, the artists in across the world, that had spoken up, even you know, Bloody Sundays, not like, it's still trying to say something, you know, it's the bit, you know, like they basically just went, fuck it, like fuck all of yous, this is
right. I mean, and like that's what I love, because people say, oh, the Sex Pistols were so dangerous. So I'm like, no, Stiff Little. I mean, those guys are lucky because they had both sides. They were being pissed off, you know, like, and nobody took them out. You know?
When you talk about putting it in the context, I mean, this I don't know anything about, but it seems almost depressing as well, because if you think about how binary thinking dominates today, you know, that's years ago. If you think, even now, we're talking about, is it Harry and Meghan versus the monarchy, or it's, what's the other thing at the moment, Andrew Tate versus Greta Thunberg. You're almost positioned all the time that you've got to pick between these things, and the whole point you're making is that there's actually a long history of trying to oppose that, but it's depressing that it hasn't got much further than
But this is where I start to understand. This is where I go, like, because Pete being from Northern Ireland and working in doing the things he does makes more sense. Like, I always say to people, like, we were doing identity politics before the rest of you.
Absolutely.
That's why it's interesting. We're 30 or 40 years,
exactly,
50 years further down the road than the rest of the world, and social media has probably created that, but we were doing it before anyone else.
And it doesn't mean me and him, he means Northern Ireland.
Yes. It was all our fault. So that's why actually doing Wake in Belfast to me is like, that's why it's super important to do it physically in the space, and we talk about punk, and we've shown the films, we've had Terry as guests, you know, we've done lots of stuff like that, because I think that sort of all that stuff really comes to bear, you know, in terms of like art or creativity and, you know, philosophy, I suppose, helping people sort of, you know, plough their way through that maze of shite that the rest of the world seems to be falling into, you know.
And if I kind of like try to give my critique of contemporary culture, right, in a nutshell, it's you have, I will call it identitarianism and identity politics are the two dominant things, which are kind of like, you can call them right wing and alt right and left wing, but I think identitarianism is where the most extreme form of identitarianism is some individual group pretends to be the universal. So there's some universal, like, hey, meritocracy, we live in a meritocracy, that's a universal thing, but the truth is certain people benefit from a meritocracy over others, right? So identitarianism is under the guise of, hey, we're all equal, there's some group that benefits over others.
Some are more equal than others.
Some are more equal than others. So that's kind of like a universal that's actually advocates for one positive identity group. Then identity politics kind of sees this very well, and it negates it. It says, hey, there's all these different identities. There is no universal identity. Every universal hides white supremacy, European supremacy, masculine supremacy, right? Anything that pretends to be, you know, a universal, actually, whether it's universal rights, whether it's, say, philosophy, whether it's mathematics, whatever it is really benefiting a certain group. And maybe even things like science, that's only one way of seeing the world. But when we universalize it and we say the scientific method is the only way of seeing the world, that is kind of a European supremacy. And so that's kind of identity politics, basically, as I say, negates those universals. The third position is the universalizing of the negation, right? That's where I think things go wrong for the woke stuff, is actually, if the first is a positive universal and the second relativizes the universal and says there are no universals, there's just different identity groups competing, intersectionality, whatever, then the psychoanalytic idea is, no, there is something that unifies us all, and it's the negative itself. It's the unknown itself, that we are all marked by an unknown, by an impossibility. We are all self-divided subjects. And so we're not unified by our identity, we're unified by the fact that we're all divided. And I think great art is art that touches on that dimension of negativity.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I mean, I just totally agree. I totally agree. That I think it's worth saying. I think that's a really good summary of it, and I think that is why psychoanalysis is important and politically useful. It's precisely because of this. The second one, the identity politics, is just as bad as the first. Yeah. Without striving for a universal subject, that we couldn't have. I mean, even a word like solidarity is probably too bourgeois, but you couldn't have any kind of effective politics without universality. So the getting rid of it is a disaster. And
but any positive universal generally tends to. So, but the universal of the negative is a way of creating solidarity around the divided.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you take as the ground of being almost lack itself, understanding that the commodity can't fill lack. This is a great basis to do some kind of politics that, maybe will lead to something else. Yeah.
Do you want to have a wee look at any questions?
No.
No, you're doing. That's your job.
I know. Well, they haven't, but they're talking to themselves.
Okay. Well, I'll say one thing as where I'm kind of like.
I wonder why.
They're organising another meetup.
Yes.
I got a question.
Oh yeah.
In what sense are we using the word political?
Oh, Jesus.
Oh, man.
I can give it a definition.
Okay,
and it's the different. It's not like party political. It's politics as such. So, politics is the space where we are able to have a confrontation with the mismatched desires of the group with which we live, related to the materials that we have together. When we think that politics is bashing people over the head with one way of seeing the world, we're precisely not doing politics, because politics has to take into account, in order to have this idea of contestation and tarrying, we have to admit that everybody has different perspectives, because we are all divided. We all have in common that we're divided, therefore we desire, but because of contingent experiences within reality, our desires are different.
Okay, can I rephrase that, see if I'm hearing you right, because I think that's very, very good. I think it's brilliant. Like,
let me just rephrase it for you, lady.
No, I think that's very, very good, but I want to make sure I'm hearing you right, because Ari said like that, because it actually fits with that. What's that famous saying that kind of, politics begins, what's it? Politics is war by other means, or something like that. I forget what it is. But
it was the same as, war isn't conflict, it's the inability to do conflict. So politics is the conflict
Yes.
of desire.
So what you're kind of saying is almost like scapegoating is not politics. Like what happens in a very primitive way is what we want to do is create oppositions. We want to create enemies that we can destroy, that we can blame for everything, that we can imagine if only we got rid of those Republicans, if only we got rid of those Democrats, right, things would be better. And you say, like, kind of in a sense, politics proper begins when we do not scapegoat, when we don't reduce difference to opposition. When we basically
So the logic of difference to opposition or contradiction to opposition is the logic of the market, which, as we've seen, like the capitalist logic can disguise itself in any way, but it's that dynamic. So often what we say is like, well, the voice of the weakest must be made stronger, so we can't do politics in the traditional sense because of that. But that is always just then going to be weaponized by capitalism because it's following the logic of essentialism and opposition.
Like in terms of Northern Ireland, concrete example that.
Yeah, so 1998 is politics. That was politics.
Exactly. So like we were in a 30-year war. That's not really politics. Politics began when everyone sat down and said, we can't keep killing each other, we're going to destroy the place, we have got to go from war to conflict, we've got to somehow tarry with...
Politics is grace in a way.
Yeah. And,
you know, what we have in Northern Ireland at the moment, we're not doing politics because people can't stand to accept, you know, there's a gridlock.
Yes.
Because the gridlock is to do with I'm right, this is wrong.
And didn't the people vote, though? The people voted for the Good Friday Agreement as well, so the people were also involved.
So is what you're saying that most politics that happens today isn't politics?
Yeah. I would say basically
because I kind of agree with you, but he would say actually, politics is all about opposition.
No, it absolutely is, but it's the process of opposition. It's the space in order for opposition to happen. Okay, I mean, I don't.
He would almost say it's about creating an enemy and an outsider and insider.
No, but okay, this is also where I've heard this interpretation of Lacan, which I think I don't agree with, because I do think the analyst discourse leads to the possibility of doing politics.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, you can't do politics in the analyst discourse. Well, you can't do politics without going through the analyst discourse. I don't think. It's like you can't do the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous without doing step 0, which is grace as such, which is openness. We don't know where we're going. We don't know that we're right. We are broken. We are all divided, and we have to create a space where it's almost like that. You know, we talked about like the idea of play. You can't have play without rules. You can't have politics without the creation of a space where this can happen.
I mean, I think the question of what is politics, it's a more sort of simple answer, I guess. But I think really useful today is this idea of Jacques, the French theorist, which basically says that what's happened in politics today is that we've lost the ability to know where the important sites of contestation are. In other words, we've lost the ability to pick our battles, and therefore politics can't happen. Right, so, and that's true when we're told to pick between what you were saying, the contradictory stuff. You're told to pick between X and Y, you're told to pick between this and that, or you're told to care about identity politics rather than material conditions or something like that. You know, what politics is to me is when the contestation is actually happening at the right place.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not when it's been misdirected into all these other things called politics.
So yeah, exactly. That's why a lot of these like campaign stuff is apolitical, because the political step 0 hasn't happened. So, I mean, where maybe this Schmidt idea is, you know, onto something, even though I don't think he's right, is this idea of war isn't conflict, it's the inability to do conflict, but conflict in the right space. Yes. You know, of course, like...
And that's kind of Hegel's notion of politics, from what I understand, is kind of like, it's whenever we get to the level in modern society where contradiction is embraced at a symbolic level. That's when politics happens. Yeah.
So how do you reconcile the conflict with somebody who wants to use politics to just make themselves rich?
Well, then that's when it's not politics. Then it's the illusion of politics.
No, I know, but how do you find that?
This is the really difficult thing, right? And I think it is. It's hard. Like, what comes first, like a philosophical shift or a political shift? Like, can we get to politics without having like almost a theological transformation in the way we understand subjectivity? Have we got so deep into capitalism that we almost need like a theological reading of our relationship to capitalism in order for us to like get to the first step of doing politics in the first place? Or, I mean, but at the same time, like the conditions are so shit that in order for us to be able to get to the point where we can do philosophical thinking, we need to have better material conditions. So we actually urgently need some kind of like political change now. But where is this going to come from? It's definitely not there in any of the party political system.
Without giving too much away, but the reason why I hardly ever vote is because most of the times where I have the ability to vote, I don't see politics. I've voted occasionally whenever strategically I think there's a political moment. But there's also times whenever there's a possible vote, and to use the cheese example, it's like pressing the closed door button.
But here's an example of politics happening outside of the space that we thought was political. Is in the UK, all of these strikes happening. So we have a really shit situation in our country. It's basically a poor country with some rich people in it now. And we have had a huge amount of strikes which are really supported by the general population, but not supported by any political party or either of the major political parties, including the Labour Party, which was supposed to be the party of, workers. So politics has had to sort of go elsewhere. Exactly. So which means that our political system is really fucking shit at the moment.
Yeah. Absolutely. We've got.
Happy Christmas, everyone!
That's a lovely reunion. Of what you guys are going to be talking about.
Do you understand why it's called Wake now?
No, yeah.
Sitting around drinking, getting depressed.
Yeah, depressed. Everyone's like dying. Everyone's hopes and dreams are dying.
Sorry,
I've got the pigtails on for a reason, actually. You mentioned Greta Thunberg, but sometimes we get onto these topics. I feel a little bit Greta Thunberg myself.
Very good. Does anybody want to mention anything more about politics? And then I'm going to drop back a little bit to the reconnect with you.
I've got a question for everybody else. I would like to know what people think that what we can do to do politics, whether philosophy comes first, whether community, how do we get back to doing politics?
I just want to make sure I'm not going to get cancelled for sitting on this. I love everybody.
What's your position on Elon Musk?
What's your position on Elon Musk?
You've given
I'd be very public.
Yeah, you like Elon Musk.
Yeah, I think. No, let's not talk about Elon Musk.
What was your question, sir?
I was just asking what people think about
capitalism
this.
Is horrible.
No, but I mean, I think it's a big question. I really don't know. I think unionism is a problematic space in some ways, but also can be useful. I think Pete's concept of a church that starts to do these things is also an attempt to find a space for politics when there are so few in politics, and also maybe through music. I don't know what Jay does.
Art.
There's various ways,
places
it can happen.
I used to be an activist.
Yeah.
And part of my self-defining as an activist was not being a politician. It's just going. That doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. So it was. In my glory days, this was direct action stuff, and it was creative, and it was grassroots, and it was conversational. Yeah,
but this is one amazing thing that I think has happened. We were talking about this the other day. It's like because of there's all kinds of disasters because of social media. But one thing is, podcasts, the para-academic stuff has its issues in terms of precarity and people feeling the need to generate content and this kind of stuff, and people not getting paid or whatever. But there is something about, precisely maybe because people aren't getting paid, that you can have these honest conversations, and that's a start.
This is politics.
For me, the way I make sense of it is I read a book once. It wasn't by Pete.
Was that when you got your degree?
Anyway, the guy was talking. He died shortly after he wrote the book, but he was talking about capitalism isn't going to be fixed by revolution.
Yeah.
So what we need to do is find out ways to erode capitalism, and the phrase eroding capitalism has been running around my head for years now. So that I try to shop, and being a freelancer and a self-employed person really made me actually realised capitalism was fucked.
Yeah.
That was the point where I went, oh, this is really bad. So, you know, I try to shop in local shops. I try to, like, I recently had an injury, which means I can't drive. I'm really not keen to start driving again. You know, I like having to walk everywhere and get the bus, but those are all like small incremental revolutions that I think are political acts. You know, my kids, like literally, like at the dinner table, will be like, "Yes, Daddy, it's capitalism." You know, it's that sort of stuff. You know, so just I think seeing it for what it is and trying to find where it has its tentacles, you know, and trying to kind of hit them with cigarette butts or something, you know, like just do your little bit. Like,
I agree with you a bit, but also not. Because I agree with you about the eroding capitalism thing, and I think, you know, this is where like accelerationists go wrong, like people who think capitalism is going to destroy itself so you can just sit back. We do obviously need little things that we can do to start eroding capitalism, but I think the danger with the personal stuff is that you turn it all in on yourself and actually, you know, so you direct your attention and energy towards like self-care and self-help, which are obviously dominant discourses or whatever. So you're right, it's kind of like redirecting your anarchist energy inwards, self-improvement, rather than outwards at the capitalism, which is...
Oh, I shared about stuff on Twitter too.
But you have to do both. As long as you do both, I'm fine with this. You know.
Well, I guess, like, so we're coming to the...
But I mean, if you look at someone like Dr. King, who had the situation when he became very unpopular is when he realized that the underlying problem of racism in America was capitalism. And so he started to take on capitalism with the Poor People's Campaign and what he was saying about the war. It was really amazing. I think people like him and Cornel West, I mean, these men who started off going like, well, we're going to just do social justice issues with our fellow African American brothers and sisters, and then, you know, we save the white people from racism, and then going like, oh, but there's an underlying issue here that capitalism keeps playing. And I think these guys like this, I think, often get ignored because of grandeur, you know, oh, they were legends, you know. But they saw this underlying issue that capitalism kept playing in it, and they realized that we're going to have to hit this area, we're going to have to hit capitalism, or these things are just going to continue to grow out of it. It's just going to be different symptoms. These were the symptoms earlier, and these are the symptoms. I've been fighting the symptoms, now we need to fight the disease, because the disease is capitalism. That's what's caused a lot of separation. I know that's very simple for you.
I know. I'm just, it's funny because it's a very important discourse. We're talking about capitalism now, but I'm also very aware that that's very...
No, in America, also as well, that it's difficult to talk about because it comes with a lot of... It's like, we were talking about, like, there's certain things in this world that, like, these objects that if you use, you can transform it. Like if you wear a fluorescent vest or carry a whistle or wear sunglasses, it transforms you in some way. But like the word capitalism as well is one of these words that like does something.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Almost, you know, you get this like McCarthyite, like backlash if you criticize it in some way. And also, you know, this is not to say, because in a way
I don't identify with most of the movements that call themselves anti-capitalist.
Exactly, because they're often very capitalistic.
Yeah.
But also, you know, this is like this idea that we all lack. It's like, because capitalism inheres in like everything. It's like this is something that's not like, you know, means that we're critiquing conservatives or critiquing liberals or whatever. This is, and it's not a personal issue.
Yeah. Yes. No.
Yeah.
No. Yes. Very good. I'm kind of going like...
I don't think you need to add to that.
Yeah, okay. Don't add anything to that. But then, okay, then I'll do my Jerry Springer.
I'll
do my...
Can I just lots of good reviews for Helen on the chat here, and also Sawyer wanting to know why everyone on the couch is running for office. That's a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Okay, well, to finish up, like everything we've been describing and talking about does actually connect then with this idea of the unknown or the negative. And we've talked about the society of pure positivity, where, you know, we're always our self-entrepreneurs, we have to galvanize and maximize. We've talked about you know, the problems of fatigue and burnout and that. We talked about politics as an orientation to the unknowing. Paratheology is basically trying to create collectives in which we orient ourselves to the unknowing. And so I'll finish off with a couple of thoughts on it and then we're done. Which is, right from when we're children, one of the things we're most fascinated by is what the other desires. And how that manifests itself is often in the obsession that the child has with the eyes of the other. And we are one of the only mammals, one of the only creatures that has like really white, what's that part called? The iris?
Eyeball.
Eyeball. You've got the eyeball and you've got the sea of white.
The power of the eyeball.
But basically, we're animals who can really tell what people are looking at. And there's a point where infants become interested not in looking at the face of their parent, but looking at where their parent is looking, becoming really interested in what their eyes fall on, what interests the other person. And they start to become interested in what interests the other. And very early on, we're interested in what does the other desire? What does the other want? And what does the other want from me? And this orientation to the unknowing dimension of the other is connected to what's called the death drive, which is we're fascinated by that unknown dimension of the other. And if religion is about orienting ourselves to the unknowing, then it's universal. You'll never get rid of it, because there's something about being human that is in a very natural way always interested in why is that person looking at me? What does that person want from me? How can I be what that person desires? Or how can I get away from that person's desire? Right? It's traumatic sometimes, it's desirous sometimes. The thing called object A, object putia, in psychoanalysis is basically something that happens in your life that tickles the earliest question of what does the other desire of me, right? It kind of draws out. You almost experience it's not a very bad way.
Oh, yeah. There's some
yeah, it was like really at the height of like a short man's ball.
I know. Yeah. Tickling the balls of the Das Ding is really what object A is. Because if Das Ding is the unknown desire of the other, then in your adult life, something that casts that up it kind of draws us in. And the point is not to try to defend ourselves to that unknowing, but to somehow, to love somebody is to open yourself up to the desire and the unknowing of the other. And something I've talked about a few times is often in dating sites, women say about men, I hope they're not a weirdo, and men say about women, I hope they're not crazy. But obviously we want a little bit of weirdo and we want a little bit of crazy, because the weirdo and the crazy are the names we give to the part of the other that's weird, that we can't grasp, that seems irrational. And if we don't have a little bit of weirdness and a little bit of craziness, we don't have a lot of interest, right? But we all are weirdos and crazies. And religion is an orientation to the weirdness and the craziness of the universe. There you go. Sure. All right. Thanks very much for joining us.
Did you guys talk about the next wake?
We did a little bit.
Okay.
Which is, we don't know what we're doing. Probably more of this year. No live.
That's what I call a 2024 problem.
Yes, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Will I just click off? Is there anything we do?
Yeah.
We all wave. We all wave. Everyone tickle the balls.
All right.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Oh, I did.